Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday, March 25th, for our LinkedIn Live here, Top Voice Tuesday with Russ Riendeau. I'm going to give Russ a chance to introduce himself. You may notice a couple things. Number one, I am not in my normal spot. I'm dialing in from Las Vegas here today to attend an event, so I'm excited for that. If you're following me on social media, you'll see some more of that here in a bit. But our Top Voice Tuesday series is all about introducing these amazing folks we call top voices to each other. If you missed any past episodes, you can see those all on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9. And I mentioned this last week, but just last week we did launch the newsletter that comes out tied to this with some other insights from my new book. That's on my website, michaeljlopez.coach. You can sign up there. But this week is a really interesting topic, a little different, and we'll tell a story about how we got here. But before I do that, Russ, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself to everyone. Tell us who you are. How did you get to the top of the Top Voice Mountain? And we'll jump in.
Mike, good morning. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I appreciate the chance to have a different conversation today, right? That we're going to have. And for those you folks out there in TV land, Russ Riendeau, I have been a LinkedIn top voice for the past year or so. They designated it because they saw the content that I put out, and I guess people like Mike and I hit the criteria of putting out a lot of content that is curated well and distributed well on some topics. So I'm excited about that. I have been a executive recruiter for the last 40 years. And along with recruiting, I also am a Mayo Clinic certified and trained wellness coach. So I do peak performance coaching and wellness coaching, primarily for men in high performing roles. So with a little bit of gray hair and a lot of experience doing a lot of things, I can relate to some of the challenges that executives have. So I've been doing that for a long, long time, and virtually, so I can work with anybody throughout the U.S. And I've written, like Mike. Mike is also now a published author, which is congrats to him. And I've also written a bunch of books over the years, written a bunch of music. I do some art, ride my motorcycle, which the weather's getting better in Chicago to be able to do. So, but I am a behavioral scientist by education. I have always been a curiositist, and I love to ask the questions to myself and other people, is ask the tough questions, because you'll find where the tough answers are. So as a behavioral scientist, I'm always looking at if we can replicate research and ask a better question. So that's what Mike and I will be talking about on the subject today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Russ. That's great. And for those of you that just to add to Russ's impressive Renaissance resume of skills, Russ is the mentor that took me the last mile on my book. As we were just chatting before this, kind of put me through the ringer a little bit, and that was a fun experience of asking hard questions at the last mile. It was really, really helpful. And I think I said a couple times, I wish I had met you 6 months ago, but here we were. You made an incredible impact on the last few weeks of my publishing experience, and as a result, you are the endorsement on the back cover of the book from you. I think you read it in a draft form in a PDF over like 2 days and gave me a bunch of feedback. So I can't thank you enough for that. And we'll be friends forever as a result. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm honored that you included that endorsement. And yes, it is an interesting book. Order now while supplies last. So operators are standing by, right? So no, it's a good book.
I think you and I are the only ones old enough to know what that actually is from. So let's jump in and talk about this conversation of, it's a different one, right? So there's no place like living at home in your parents' house. And this conversation, when we were discussing what to talk about, you brought up this idea. Why did you want to talk? Why did you bring this up? Why did you want to talk about this on a LinkedIn live conversation?
Because it's a topic that comes up all the time, but it's not talked about. Um, it impacts when adult children, and for this conversation is mostly we're talking about adult children, right? It's not when kids go to college and come home after they graduate and they're trying to find a job before they move out. That's a different dialogue, right?
Right.
But when adult children need to move back home for some reason, it upsets everything. Not upsets in a bad way. It just upsets the dynamics of everybody's lives in a very intense way that sometimes is not recognized and discussed enough um, to be a healthy situation. And I have seen that as a as a parent. I've seen family and friends have these kind of scenarios. Even in my little neighborhood, I've seen this happen and had these conversations with people. Or I've talked to candidates or executives whose kids have had to move back for whatever reason. So it is a topic that I think really needs to be addressed because people just don't know what to do in some of those situations, and we can talk about options. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. And Annalise got a little comment in the chat. Thanks for joining. For those of you that are just dialing in, use the chat, please. We'll take a question or two from Russ. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Um, I think one of the things that we've transitioned to in this new future of work, world of work that we have in the post-pandemic kind of reality is this, you're at home, I'm in a hotel room, I'm usually at home. We're always somewhere working, people are coming in and out. We've hailed the integrated work-life experience that's given people flexibility and time to go to the gym, time to spend time with loved ones. But there's this other sort of dark side of it, right? So it's a complicated issue as to why. So what's the real kind of underlying, or what are the factors that are prompting people to have to do this?
Um, Great question. I think there's a few things that we are seeing in the market, right? One is, and these might be broad brushes, but we can always drill into them a little bit more. Is um, people lost their jobs during the pandemic, so they ran out of money. They had to move back home with mom and dad, or needed to at some point. So the pandemic influenced a lot of that. Interest rates, housing, difficult to find a house, so people might have to move back home for that. Um, Divorce is many times a real big factor. When we consider the fact that 50% of marriages end in divorce, when that marriage ends in divorce, and you're adults, and maybe you have kids, maybe not, maybe you got dogs and cats or whatever, is where are you going to go in the interim because you're spending money, you're investing money. We don't know if the divorce was amicable or hostile or whatever the case may be, but you need a place to go. And the first place you call is, if you've got a good relationship, is maybe you call your mom and dad, right? Um, you don't want to, but that might be the quickest way depending on that scenario. So those are some of the factors that come into play. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe there's illness. Maybe there was an accident or an injury, or the house burned down, or a car crash, or a child is sick, or there's the death in the family of some sort that that causes people to have to move in. Maybe there's been a mental health challenge, which we saw a lot, right? A lot during the pandemic, where people had to move back home. They needed care, whatever the case. Depression, anxiety, personality disorders, whatever that scenario was, and they were forced to move back home. Um, and therein comes the challenge, right? Is mom and dad have a chance, and and maybe what if the parents are divorced, right? I mean, here's the other thing: is if 50% of divorces end in marriage, that means 50% of the moms and dads might be divorced.
Yeah.
They might be single, or they might be remarried. And now you've got a second marriage where the spouse says, "Excuse me, why are we bringing your son into this? I don't really know him, and And right, so now you've got conflict and stress that's added to that relationship as well.
Yeah. It's such a multi-dimensional thing. I mean, I've been through some of what you're describing myself. I can certainly attest to the experience and having to make some big life choices that they're tough, right? These are hard decisions. And I think what you're labeling and what you're naming is this idea that we don't really go back because we want to. There's something that has happened and we have to, right? And that I think creates this interesting dynamic. So we talked about this when we were kind of preparing. There's this, you know, probably don't have the data on how often it's whatever is driving it, but there is this idea of kind of once you're there, um, the dynamic changes, right? And there's these two sides of the coin. There's the experience of the adult children living there, and maybe they're on their own or have a family, and there's the experience of the parents. Let's sort of talk about each one because I think a lot of people would be interested on nobody wants to be here, but we got to kind of work through it, right? So who is it tougher on? Is it
Yeah.
tougher on either of those two groups? Is that even a fair question?
Um, I think it's a good question. I don't know if it's a, I don't know if the word fair would be right. I don't know if it's a question that, like you said, is we don't have data on that because it's one of those, well, it depends, right?
Right.
And I think it's also too important, Mike, that what we're talking about here is we're not trying to place judgment here. We're not we're not saying that it's wrong to let your kids stay at your house. We're not saying it's wrong for adult children to call mom and dad or mom or dad and say, "Hey, I need your help
I
through
need
adult."
help. Right.
We're
Right.
not making any judgments here. It's a very emotional, heartfelt conversation, and we don't have the answers. No one does. But having done some research that you and I have done, and people are aware of this, what we can do is having this kind of conversation allows people to be a little bit more aware of what is influencing their behavior and influencing their decisions. And it might help someone, right? For example, just to set a boundary before someone walks in the door. Okay, you two can come in, but the German Shepherd that sheds like a wool rug, he's outside or he's right. I mean, we're not picking on dogs or cats, but well, if you let a cat in, they're going to steal your identity and steal all your pins. So that's another story. But you ask, is it tougher on the parents or the kids? And it depends on the situation, the temperament, the personality of the people involved. Um, the age, I think the age of the parents, where they're at in their stage of life, right? If are they working? Are they not working? Are they active? Are they sick? Are they retired in Arizona? What's their activity? And I made a note here. So for example, what some of the things that could be going on in that household, right? You see behind me, this is my wife and I, Cheryl and I, we live in a townhouse outside of Chicago in the suburbs, and we don't have a real big, we don't need a lot of space, but this is good for Cheryl and I, right? Living room, dining room, kitchen, bedrooms upstairs. All of a sudden now, a husband and wife, or a son and daughter, or a son and wife, or a daughter and husband show up, and maybe they have a kid or a whatever. It gets pretty crowded
Right.
around dinner time, right? Separate space, it's going to impact. But things that could be um, the issue is one is lack of privacy, TV time, overall noise, bedtime rituals, sharing bathrooms, mail delivery, newspapers, um, the topic of intimacy, right? If you are inviting or having a adult children, a married couple, um, intimacy is an important part of all of our relationships. Are you going to be cramping my style, right? Am
Right.
I going to be cramping your style? Am I going to
Right.
be having to alter my intimacy habits with my spouse and you the same way? That creates pressure, tension, It creates not denial. What's the word I'm looking for? It'll come back to me in a minute.
Yeah.
Um,
Resentment.
resentment. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The added costs that are involved, right? Oh, sure. Well, it's not that expensive. It's expensive to have people living at your house. We
Yeah.
all know that. Who's going to pitch in? Is there a dollar number involved, right? Well, what if they're having money problems? You can't ask them for money because they don't have any money. That's why they're at your house to begin with.
Yeah.
But so how
This
you address the compensation plan, how, what are the living arrangements, what time people are going to bed, travel, where are you parking your car? Where are you putting all your stuff? Is it in my garage? Now my nice car has to sit outside, or maybe the son has a motorcycle. Can I put that in the garage and, put your Porsche? No. Uh, Entertainment, right? Socialization. Now I have kids living in my house. Socialization. What do my friends think about that, right? How it impacts my relationships with everybody in the neighborhood. Food and drink and exercise. Everybody's habit is disrupted. Work. Where is your son or daughter or whoever is living there going to work? Is there an extra office, a basement? So all of these things come into play that can create frustration and guilt and worry and stress and challenges for making decisions. Even the decision making, Mike, you and I talked about that um, in our in our briefs before. Is everything affects everything else. So the decision I make today with you in my house is a different decision if you weren't in my house. Decisions about my future, a job interview I might go on, a person I might go to meet, or I don't meet because I have to be home to do something because you're living here. It is a trickle down effect that we don't sometimes realize the impact of that. And
Yeah.
we haven't even talked about the scenario why they are here. Was it
Yeah.
related to financial crisis? Was it a money in the bank? Was it a divorce? Was it infidelity? Was it criminal? Did they commit a crime? Did they have to go to jail? Is there lawyers involved? Are there nefarious strangers knocking on my door? I'm looking on my Ring doorbell at midnight. Who is this? Um, is there counseling involved? Are there doctors involved? What's their health status? All these things come into play that
Yeah.
we got to make decisions on.
Yeah, there's so much there, and I would love to, for those folks who are listening, we're going to come back and pick these apart. Those of folks listening, if you've got a story to share or a question, or you've been in this situation, and I think you've painted some, factors that might seem, pretty extreme, and in terms of a crime or something like that, and there's levels to it, right? There's all sorts
Right.
of reasons why. But I think the thing that I'm interested in all of it, but maybe another question is, all of this was kind of one set of conversations before most people worked from home. And now there's this whole new level of integration that comes with this. Do we have any data or a perspective from employers about any effects that these kinds of scenarios, how often do they happen? Do we have any data that suggests they're disruptive to the point of impacting, performance at work? Or is that just, we just assume that it is because of the scenarios that you've painted?
Yeah. That's a good question. I will say this: I have done some research to try to find some data on that. It's difficult to find, and part of it is in terms of when we looked at, like you talked about. If I generalize, talk about, is there a correlation or impact on job performance if you are living with adult children or parents, right? Uh, so is my work impacted because I'm living with someone else? And the research won't show much because that kind of research is all self-reported,
Right.
right? We can't put people in a laboratory and test it. So there's no reliability or validity in that, in those kind of statistics. And self-reporting, the margin of error for self-reporting surveys is very high. So we can't trust what people will say in those reported surveys. Um, but I do know, for example, that when you see people that have had a job change or numerous job changes over a period of time, a high majority of the time is when you see adults changing jobs frequently, there's something else going on other than they just didn't like their job.
Hmm.
There normally is some kind of a crisis, a divorce, a death in the family, a sick child, an injury, um, parents moving somewhere. I've had candidates call, their house burned down and they had nowhere to go, and they lost. Substance abuse is a big factor too. So when you see people that are going through a difficult time, they can't perform in their job as well as they should. What happens? They get fired.
Hmm.
So that's one component. And how much of our performance is impacted if I have to work at my folks' kitchen table to do my job,
Right.
right? Am I going to be distracted? I'm not putting myself fully into my job because A, I'm distracted because I'm at mom and dad's house, A, and B, there's some other crisis in my life going on because I'm here.
That's how it prompted me to be there. Yeah.
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 So that crisis put me here, and now I'm trying to compensate by doing a good job and hold my job, and that creates more conflict. So and it's difficult to find research on that, and also because of the PIP acts and confidentiality, you can't
Sure.
ask people. You can
Sure.
ask them like, everything okay, but you can't dive too much deeper in that.
Right. So
You
so
know.
let's talk about then you mentioned all the reasons why we can end up here, and they're varied and multiple and dependent on all sorts of things. Um the question I think everyone wants to know is, so what, you've mentioned some of the impacts, but what are the real behavioral impacts on adult children? There's this sort of failure to launch syndrome, but we're not really talking about that, but there is this idea that I move back because I need to. How long do I stay? When do I get out? Am I degrading as an adult in some level, right? Atrophying my skills because I've sort of returned to this place. Like, what are the real behavioral impacts that we see from these kind of scenarios?
And you're talking about the impacts as it relates to the adult child moving back home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think there's a couple things that are important to be aware of. And here again, we're not making judgments on anybody here. We're just having a conversation. But as a behavioral scientist, I look at it from the standpoint of what impacted what, right? And when an adult child has to move home, the majority of the cases is something went wrong somewhere. There were some bad decisions. There was a lack of doing something um, as well as it should have been done. A bad relationship, timing. Again, we talk about a substance abuse problem, mental health issues. So that adult child typically will feel uh, discouraged that they had to call mom and dad, or even if an aunt or an uncle or whoever, they will feel bad that they had to make that phone call. They didn't want to do it, but they felt that they had no place else to go, or that was the best scenario at the time, or there was built-in daycare if they have a child. So that's a real big component. um, Many times, the reporting will say people feel trapped in that situation.
Mm.
Their life is suspended for a while. They don't know what to do. They're waiting out something, right? Um, I know at least two or three people in my orbit that are dealing with kids that are going through a divorce. The divorce went south, got nasty. They're waiting it out for attorneys to get things, and in the meantime, they're moving cars around in their driveway and their garage, and there's stuff in the garage. And mom and dad can't do things they want to do, and they're helping out watching the kid, and and the son has to go to work, and the wife says, ex-wife soon to be says, talk with you through my attorney. Uh, Something went bad that it got ugly, but there's stress on that father uh, of the child that he's living at home that he's having a hard time dealing with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So um, so there is a challenge there, and um, normally normally something has happened before that. In essence, if you look back on the history, right, when you the old adage is when you see behavior, believe it,
Right.
right?
Right.
And when you see people's behavior, it's that's not the first time that they've engaged in this behavior, right? Rarely do we come across someone who's seen something for the first time in the history of man. When
Right.
when you and I do something, when I put my hands together like this isn't the first time I've done this, right? I probably did this when I was 10 years old. So same with adults is if there was a mistake or something that caused them to have to move back home for a while, there probably was a little bit of a pattern somewhere else that you might be able to see something coming that maybe wasn't moving in, but it could have been a series of errors or mistakes or bad judgments that put them in this scenario.
So let's talk about that, and maybe we've got a few minutes left. I want to hit a couple quick questions, but how do we get out of it, right? I think that's the big question then that most people would have, and I think maybe just to, as you think about that question, one of the things that comes up for me, particularly in the world of change, which is kind of where I sit, is this kind of a change. It's a change for everyone. It's certainly a huge environmental
Yeah,
shift, right? And you've mentioned, people occupying the same space and some of the very practical things that you just like who's parking where, right? And all these kinds of things that sound small individually, but when you add them up, they represent really sizable environmental shifts that break habits, they create stress, they create tension. Most of us sort of maybe think that those all end up being a bad thing, but it's somewhere in there. There's a lot of support and help and emotional support and
yeah,
emotional guidance that people get, right? And that's certainly in people in these situations need that. But so you've made it back. How do we get out of it? How do we set boundaries? How do we launch back to the other side?
yeah. Great point. And well, you're talking about how do we get the adult child that's moved back? How does he
That's
get
right.
back? Or
Right. How do we we're here, we've gone through all the stuff. How do you get out and start your life over and
yeah,
break that
um,
relationship in a way that now everyone can go back to normal, whatever that is?
yeah, yeah. Whatever, right? The
Yeah.
new
Yeah. Yeah.
normal, right? The new
Yeah.
normal is. Um, there's a couple things, and I say this based on some research I did, and also it's some common sense, but easier said than done. One is if you're in this situation, you might need counseling or a coach to help you through this, right? So if you feel that you are in a spot, I would encourage people is see a counselor, find a coach, find someone who can get you out of your own way if that's the problem, or make sure that you're getting good advice on what your rights are in terms of the scenario. But don't try to go it alone. Is get some perspective. I also would encourage people is if talk to people that have a mentor, have someone a confidant that you can talk to about this to get another perspective. Um, Also, people can you're going to have to get a little bit deeper into your own head a little bit and have some fierce conversations with yourself
Yeah.
about making some changes and really being self-aware enough to say, how is this impacting mom and dad or mom, whatever it is. You have to be aware of that because you can't be so caught up in your own little world that you're not recognizing all the stress that's going on around you.
Yeah. That's a
Um,
really good point. That's a really
you
good
know,
point.
yeah, it's that's important. Is the financial scenario? You've got to put some money in the bank, right? If that's the case, may be. I don't have enough. I'm not smart enough to talk about the money situation because that's a whole nother. if they had the money, they would be staying at extended stay, or they'd be in Vegas with you, right? So so money is a whole different situation, but is understand that someone's got to set some boundaries, right? And maybe it's you that set the boundaries, or make sure that you respect the fact that you're being allowed to stay in this house, right? Right? Your parents could have said, "Hey, since when is your emergency my problem?" Right? Or your parents could have said, "Well, before you move in, here's a question: make believe that mom and I are dead, and if we were dead, where would you go? If you couldn't come here, where would you go?"
Mm,
And the son says, "I would probably call, Uncle Frank, or my friend Steve." I suggest you call them now.
right.
Right?
Right.
We are your third choice. You don't want to be here, right? But that's a mom and dad. There's conflict there, right? So we don't know, but you have to respect the boundaries of your parents. But also and maybe it's talking to your boss as well. Depending on your relationship,
A
explain to
really
them.
good one.
Explain to them. Here's my situation. Boss, I might not be 100%. You know, I'm working through some things. Depends on what your relationship is, but that's something, right, to consider. And also setting goals. I encourage people is try to find an end date, right? Try to say, okay, by X date, I will be out of here. Because if you don't feel the pain, it's very difficult to remove yourself from that situation. If the deadline, well, we'll give you another 30 days, right? I
Right.
mean, right? It's like the old
Yeah.
story, right? The doctor says, Mike doesn't look well. You got 30 days to live. Well, 30 days to live. What should I do? Live, Mike. Go on vacation, experience, go out with your live
Right.
life for 30 days. And you say to the doctor, well, boy, that's great. I don't. I'm going to have to burn through all my cash. I probably won't be able to pay your bill. And he says, okay, I'll give you another 30 days.
Right.
You know,
Right. It
old
changes
joke.
your answer. It
Yeah.
changes your answer. We're almost at time here, Russ. I want to make sure we stay. This has really been, for those of you listening in, maybe you have a story or something you thought maybe to share. It's a vulnerable conversation, and I really think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of understanding why do we end up here. What are the multiple situations? Nobody wants to be here, but we all reach out to those we love and support each other. But it comes with real conversations, real boundaries, real plans, real understanding that there's stress, and getting out of it is, in some ways even harder because you show up with the right intentions, you show up with the right hope to support the people that you love, and then now we're here, and we've got to figure out how to move on.
Yeah.
Russ, is there anything you'd like to? I have another bonus question for you, as you know, but is there
Okay.
anything you'd like to offer up to folks listening in or watching this on the YouTube channel? Just anything you want to send them to your way?
Um, I would like to ask them to do two things. One is share this podcast with someone that is in this situation or might be in this situation. Um, the only way that people will understand that they're not alone in these scenarios is to experience things that other people have. So please share this podcast if you're comfortable enough with it. Is share it with someone who might be challenged, because it will give them perspective. Um, People can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me at newfrontiercoaching.com if they have any questions or want to review anything with me. If they want to see some of the books that I've done, if they go on Amazon, books by Russ Riendeau, you can see some of the things I've done. And connect with me. You can follow me on LinkedIn as well. And I want to thank Michael for bringing me on. I appreciate that. This is a lively conversation. It's a touchy conversation that we all need to have and be more aware. So wish everybody the best of luck and hope you all have a great year too. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you, Russ. And you get one last word, which is just it's a 2 sentence answer, and to keep it really sharp because I want to make sure you hit the most impact here.
Hit me.
This
Okay.
is your bonus. What do you think is the single greatest impact that AI will have in how we lead.
In how we lead.
In how we lead.
It will make us pay attention to see if people are using AI to compensate for their intelligence.
I love that. We're going to leave
How's
that
that?
right there. We're going to leave that right there.
How's
Thanks
that?
again to
How's
everyone.
that?
I
That'll
enjoy
keep
you,
you.
Russ. You're a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks again to everyone. Please go to the YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9, to subscribe, and to the website, michaeljlopez.coach, to get the newsletter. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.